The ranch hand's confession. The words left my mouth before I could stop them, raw and desperate in the dim light of the stable. Please, sir, let me show you what I can do. My voice cracked on the last word, and I watched Dalton's eyes go wide with something I couldn't name, shock, maybe, or recognition of a line we'd both been pretending didn't exist. His calloused hand froze halfway to the saddle he'd been adjusting, and in that suspended moment, with dust motes dancing in the amber sunset streaming through the barn door, I knew everything between us was about to change. The massive rancher stood there, 6'4" of weathered strength and barely controlled restraint, while I, foolish, inexperienced, desperate, had just laid my heart bare in the most reckless way possible. His jaw clenched, his breath caught. And I wondered if I'd just destroyed the only good thing in my lonely life, or if I'd finally found the courage to reach for something more. I'd arrived at the Double D Ranch on a Tuesday morning in late April, with everything I owned stuffed into a worn duffel bag and about $40 left to my name. The bus had dropped me at the crossroads 3 miles back, and I'd walked the rest of the way under a sky so blue and endless it made my chest ache with something between hope and terror. At 20 years old, I was running from a life that had never quite fit, from a small town where everyone knew everyone's business, from a family that had made it clear there was no place for someone like me at their dinner table. The ranch sprawled before me like something out of a dream, endless pastures dotted with cattle, weathered wooden fences that seemed to stretch to the horizon, and in the distance, mountains that stood like silent guardians over this slice of wilderness. I'd answered an ad for stable help, expecting maybe a week's trial before they realized I knew next to nothing about horses or ranching or any of the 100 skills required to survive in a place like this. What I hadn't expected was Dalton Pierce. He came around the corner of the main barn just as I was standing there, dust-covered and uncertain, clutching my duffel like a lifeline. The man was enormous, not just tall, but built like someone who'd spent their entire life working with their hands, moving livestock, hauling feed, wrestling nature itself into submission. His shoulders were so broad they blocked out the sun for a moment, casting me in shadow as he approached. He wore a faded flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and marked with old scars, jeans that had seen better days but fit him like they were made for his frame, and boots that were scuffed and practical. His face was weathered and handsome in that rugged, timeless way, sharp jaw dusted with stubble, lines at the corners of his eyes from years of squinting into the sun, and a mouth that looked like it rarely smiled, but somehow seemed kind anyway. But it was his eyes that stopped me cold, deep brown, almost amber in the morning light, and so direct in their gaze that I felt seen in a way that made my stomach flip. "You the kid from the ad." His voice was exactly what I'd expected, deep, rough around the edges, with the slow drawl of someone who'd never rushed a word in his life. "Yes, sir, I'm Evan Matthews." I stuck out my hand, hoping he wouldn't notice how much it was shaking. His handshake was firm but not crushing, and it lasted maybe a second longer than strictly necessary. Up close, I could smell leather and hay and something else, pine maybe or cedar, something clean and earthy that made me want to breathe deeper. "Dalton Pierce, I run this place." He looked me over with an expression I couldn't quite read, taking in my slight frame, my second-hand clothes, the nervous energy I couldn't quite hide. "You ever worked a ranch before?" "No, sir," I admitted, figuring honesty was better than getting caught in a lie on day one. "But I'm a fast learner, and I'm not afraid of hard work. I'll do whatever you need." Something flickered in those amber eyes, amusement maybe or skepticism. "That's so?" He crossed his arms over his chest, which somehow made him look even bigger. "Ranch work ain't easy, kid. Early mornings, long days, and the work doesn't stop just 'cause you're tired or the weather's bad. You sure you're up for it?" I met his gaze as steadily as I could, trying to project a confidence I didn't entirely feel. "I'm sure." For a long moment, he just looked at me, and I had the strangest sensation that he was seeing more than I wanted him to, like he could read all the desperation and fear and hope I was trying so hard to hide. Then he nodded, just once, and the corner of his mouth lifted in something that might have been the ghost of a smile. "All right then, let's see what you got. Drop your bag in the bunkhouse, third building on the left, and meet me back here in 10 minutes. We'll start with mucking out the stables. If you can handle that without complaining, We'll talk about the rest. That first day nearly broke me. Mucking out stables turned out to be exactly as glamorous as it sounded, and by lunchtime, every muscle in my body was screaming. Dalton worked alongside me, moving with an efficiency that made everything look effortless, occasionally offering terse instructions or corrections, but mostly letting me figure things out through trial and error. He was patient in a way I hadn't expected, never raising his voice even when I did something stupid like spooking one of the horses or dropping a pitchfork on my own foot. By sunset, I was covered in dirt and sweat. My hands were blistered despite the gloves he'd given me, and I was pretty sure I'd never been so exhausted in my entire life. But when Dalton looked over the work we'd done and gave me another of those almost smiles, something warm unfurled in my chest that had nothing to do with the physical exertion. "You'll do," he said, and somehow those two words meant more than any elaborate praise could have. That night, lying in my narrow bunk in the small room I'd been assigned, I stared at the ceiling and wondered what the hell I'd gotten myself into. The bunkhouse was sparse but clean, with just the basics: a bed, a dresser, a small table and chair, and a window that looked out over the eastern pastures. I could hear the low lowing of cattle in the distance, the rustle of wind through the trees, sounds so different from the constant hum of traffic and voices I'd grown up with. It should have felt lonely. Instead, it felt like maybe, just maybe, I'd found a place where I could breathe. I didn't let myself think about the way my heart had stuttered every time Dalton had looked at me. Didn't let myself acknowledge the heat that had spread through my chest when his hand had brushed mine while passing me a water bottle. That was dangerous territory, the kind of thinking that had gotten me into trouble before, that had led to whispered conversations and pitying looks, and eventually to my father telling me I needed to figure my shit out somewhere else. No, I was here to work, to build something resembling a life, to prove I could stand on my own 2 feet, nothing more. At least, that's what I told myself. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm that was simultaneously exhausting and oddly comforting. Dalton woke me every morning at 5, usually with a knock on my door that was somehow both polite and impossible to ignore, and we'd work until the sun set and sometimes beyond. He taught me everything with the same patient, methodical approach: how to properly saddle a horse, how to check cattle for signs of illness, how to mend fence posts and repair tack and recognize which plants in the pasture were safe for grazing and which were toxic. He rarely spoke more than necessary, but when he did, his words carried weight. I learned to listen not just to what he said, but to what he didn't say, to read his moods in the set of his shoulders or the tightness around his eyes. The ranch employed a handful of other workers, a couple of older cowboys who'd been there for years, and a rotating cast of seasonal help, but Dalton and I spent most of our time working together. He said it was because I needed the most training, and that was probably true, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something else to it. The way he'd sometimes watch me when he thought I wasn't looking, his expression unreadable. The way he'd step in closer than strictly necessary when showing me how to do something, his body heat warming my back, his breath stirring my hair. The way his hand would linger on my shoulder when I did something right, his touch firm and somehow grounding in a way that made my pulse race. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was reading into things because of my own inconvenient feelings, projecting desires that had no business existing. Dalton was my boss, older than me by at least a decade, and probably straight as they came. The fact that my heart did stupid things whenever he smiled at me or praised my work was my problem to manage, not his. But then there were moments that made me wonder. Like the afternoon we were working in the upper pasture, checking fence lines after a storm had rolled through. The sun was brutal, and I'd stripped down to just a tank top, too focused on the work to care about the sunburn I was definitely going to regret later. When I looked up from the post I'd been examining, I caught Dalton staring not at the fence, but at me. His eyes tracked over my arms, my shoulders, lingering in a way that made my skin prickle with awareness. When he realized I'd noticed, he looked away quickly, his jaw tight, and went back to his own section of fence without a word. But the tension that hung between us for the rest of the afternoon was thick enough to cut. Or the evening I'd stayed late in the barn, trying to calm a spooked mare that had injured herself on some debris. I'd been sitting in her stall for over an hour, talking to her in low, soothing tones when Dalton appeared in the doorway. He'd watched me work for a few minutes, saying nothing, then walked over and crouched down beside me. "You're good with her," he'd said quietly, his voice rougher than usual. "Got a gentle touch." His hand had covered mine where it rested on the mare's neck, just for a moment, and the contact had sent electricity racing up my arm. Our faces were inches apart, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, close enough that if I just leaned forward. But then he'd pulled back, standing abruptly and muttering something about checking the other horses, leaving me sitting there with my heart pounding and 1,000 questions I didn't dare ask. I started to notice other things, too. The way Dalton didn't seem to have much of a personal life outside the ranch. No girlfriend stopping by, no mentions of going into town for dates or socializing. He lived in the main house, a modest 2-story structure that he apparently occupied alone, and his routine seemed to revolve entirely around the work. The other ranch hands occasionally made comments about it, joking about him being married to the land. But there was an edge of genuine concern in their voices, like they worried about how isolated he was. One night, about a month into my time at the ranch, a group of us went into town for drinks at the local bar. It was the first time I'd really socialized with the other workers, and I was surprised when Dalton agreed to come along. He drove us in his truck, an old Ford that had seen better days but ran like a dream, and spent most of the evening nursing a single beer and watching us from a corner booth. I tried to relax, to enjoy the music and the laughter and the feeling of belonging somewhere, but I was hyper-aware of his presence. Every time I glanced his way, he seemed to be watching me, his expression inscrutable. Around 10, a guy approached me at the bar. He was friendly, attractive in a conventional way, and clearly interested. We chatted for a few minutes about nothing in particular, and I was trying to figure out how to politely extract myself from the conversation when I felt a presence at my back. Dalton had materialized beside me, close enough that his arm brushed mine, radiating quiet intensity. "Time to head out," he said, his voice flat. It wasn't a question. The guy took one look at Dalton, all 6'4" of barely restrained something, and made a hasty exit. I turned to face him, confused and a little annoyed. I was just talking to him. I know, his eyes were dark, unreadable. Truck leaves in 5 minutes. And then he walked away, leaving me standing there trying to process what the hell had just happened. On the drive back, the cab of the truck was silent, except for the rumble of the engine and the quiet snores of one of the older cowboys in the back seat. I sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window at the darkness rolling by, feeling Dalton's presence like a physical weight beside me. Finally, unable to stand it anymore, I spoke. "Did I do something wrong?" He didn't answer right away, his hands tight on the steering wheel. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough. "No, you didn't do anything wrong." "Then why did we have to leave?" Another long silence. Then, "Because I needed to get out of there." I turned to look at him, studying his profile in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping, and his knuckles were white where he gripped the wheel. Something about the tension radiating off him made my stomach flip, made my mouth go dry. "Dalton." "Leave it, Evan." The words were quiet but firm, closing the conversation as effectively as a door slamming shut. So I left it, but I couldn't stop thinking about it, couldn't stop replaying the moment in the bar, the look in his eyes, the way he'd positioned himself between me and that other guy like he was staking some kind of claim. It didn't make sense. Unless... No, I wasn't going to let myself go down that road. Hope was dangerous, and I'd learned that lesson the hard way. Summer settled over the ranch like a warm blanket, bringing longer days and harder work. We moved cattle between pastures, repaired equipment that had broken down during spring, and dealt with the 100 small crises that seemed to crop up daily when working with animals and land. The heat was oppressive, the kind that made the air shimmer and turned the afternoons into an endurance test, but I found I didn't mind it as much as I'd expected. There was something satisfying about physical exhaustion, about falling into bed each night too tired to overthink or worry or dwell on things I couldn't change. Dalton and I had fallen into an easy partnership. We could work for hours without speaking, communicating through gestures and shared understanding, and it felt natural in a way nothing in my life ever had before. He'd started to open up more, too, sharing bits and pieces of his history during our lunch breaks or evening chores. I learned that he'd grown up on this ranch, that his father had owned it before him and his grandfather before that, stretching back generations. I learned that he'd taken over full management 10 years ago when his father passed, and that running the place alone had been both his choice and his burden. He asked about my life too, in his careful, roundabout way, and I found myself telling him things I'd never shared with anyone, about feeling like an outsider in my own family, about the loneliness of hiding fundamental parts of yourself, about the relief and terror of finally leaving it all behind. He listened without judgment, without the pity or discomfort I'd come to expect when people learn the truth about me. One evening, as we sat on the porch of the main house watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, I finally worked up the courage to say it directly. My family kicked me out because I'm gay. The words felt heavy in the twilight air, and I braced myself for his reaction. Dalton was quiet for a long moment, taking a slow sip of the coffee he'd been nursing. Then he nodded, like I'd just confirmed something he'd already known. Figured as much. When I looked at him in surprise, he met my eyes steadily. Didn't matter then, doesn't matter now. You do good work, you're respectful, and you've earned your place here. Rest is your business. The relief that washed over me was so intense it made my eyes sting. Thank you, I managed, my voice rough. Nothing to thank me for, just stating facts. He paused, seeming to wrestle with something, then added quietly, world's got enough judgment in it already. Figure the least a man can do is make his own corner of it a bit more decent. Something shifted between us after that conversation. The tension that had been building since that night at the bar seemed to ease slightly, replaced by something deeper and more complicated. We started spending more time together outside of work, sitting on the porch in the evenings, sharing meals at the small table in his kitchen, talking about everything and nothing. He told me about the challenges of keeping the ranch running in an era when small operations were struggling, about his dreams of expanding the operation, about the weight of carrying on his family's legacy. I told him about the books I'd loved as a kid, the creative writing I'd done in secret, the alternate life I'd imagined before reality had come crashing down. One night in mid-July, a storm rolled in with the kind of fury that made the whole ranch hunker down and wait it out. The main barn's roof started leaking, and Dalton and I spent hours moving equipment and livestock to drier areas, working in the wind and rain until we were both soaked through and shivering. By the time we finished, it was past midnight, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. "You're not walking back to the bunkhouse in this," Dalton said, rain dripping from his hair, his shirt plastered to his chest in a way that made it very hard to concentrate. "Guest room's made up. You can stay there." I should have argued, should have insisted I'd be fine, but the truth was I was exhausted and freezing, and the thought of his proximity, of being under the same roof, made my heart race in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. "Okay, thanks." He showed me to the guest room, a small but comfortable space with a quilt-covered bed and windows that looked out over the western pastures. He brought me towels and a set of dry clothes, an old t-shirt and sweatpants that were comically large on my smaller frame, and told me to help myself to anything I needed. Then he disappeared into his own room down the hall, and I stood there in the middle of the guest room, clutching his clothes and trying to slow my racing thoughts. I showered in the small attached bathroom, washing away the rain and sweat and dirt of the day, and changed into Dalton's clothes. They smelled like him, that combination of leather and cedar, and something indefinably masculine that made my head swim. I climbed into the bed, intending to sleep, but found myself lying awake, hyper-aware of the fact that he was just down the hall, maybe also lying awake, maybe also thinking about. "No, stop." Around 2 in the morning, I gave up on sleep and padded quietly down the stairs, thinking maybe some water or warm milk or something would help settle me. The kitchen was dark except for the light over the sink, which Dalton apparently left on all night. I was reaching for a glass when a voice from the doorway nearly made me jump out of my skin. "Can't sleep either." I spun around to find Dalton leaning against the doorframe, wearing only a pair of low-slung pajama pants, his chest bare and his hair mussed from lying in bed. The sight of him like that, relaxed, unguarded, half undressed, did absolutely nothing to help the state I was in. Sorry, I didn't mean to wake you. You didn't been up for hours. He moved into the kitchen, brushing past me to reach the cabinet where he kept the mugs. The brief contact of his arm against mine sent a jolt through me that I desperately tried to ignore. Storm's got the horses spooked, can hear 'em from my room. He made us both tea, something herbal that he claimed would help us relax, and we sat at the kitchen table, the only sound the drumming of rain against the windows and the occasional rumble of thunder. The intimacy of it, sitting in his kitchen in the middle of the night, wearing his clothes, sharing quiet conversation while the world slept, felt almost unbearably intense. I was acutely aware of every detail, the way the dim light caught the planes of his face, the rise and fall of his chest as he breathed, the way his fingers wrapped around his mug like he needed something to hold onto. "Can I ask you something?" The words were out before I could stop them. He looked up, meeting my eyes over the rim of his mug. "Sure." "That night at the bar, why did we really leave?" For a long moment, I thought he wasn't going to answer. He set down his mug carefully, his jaw working like he was chewing on the words before letting them out. "Because watching that guy flirt with you was making me crazy," he said finally, his voice so low I almost missed it. "And that ain't fair to you or anyone else, so I figured the smart thing was to remove myself from the situation." My heart was suddenly beating so hard I was sure he could hear it. "Why would it make you crazy?" Another long silence. Then he stood abruptly, crossing to the sink with his mug even though it was still half full. He braced his hands on the counter, his back to me, and I could see the tension in every line of his body. "Because I got no right to feel that way. You're 20 years old, Evan, you work for me, and I'm—" He trailed off, shaking his head. I stood too, moving closer, even though every instinct screamed at me to be careful, to protect myself. "You're what?" He turned to face me, and the look in his eyes made my breath catch. There was want there, raw and barely controlled, mixed with something that looked like anguish. "I'm 34 years old, and I run this ranch, and you depend on me for your livelihood. The power dynamic alone makes any kind of anything inappropriate as hell." He dragged a hand through his hair, looking more unsettled than I'd ever seen him. "And beyond that, I got my own complications. Spent my whole life in this town, carrying my family's name, being who everyone expects me to be. Coming to terms with the fact that I'm attracted to men took me damn near 2 decades, and I still haven't worked up the courage to do anything about it." The confession hung in the air between us, huge and terrifying and wonderful. "Dalton." "Don't," he held up a hand, stopping me. "Don't make this harder than it already is. You've got your whole life ahead of you, kid. You're gonna leave this ranch eventually, find someone your own age, someone who hasn't spent half their life hiding. And that's how it should be. But until then, I need you to understand that the distance I'm trying to keep. It's not because I don't." He stopped, closing his eyes like the words were being torn out of him. "It's not because I don't want to. It's because I respect you too much to put you in a position where you might feel obligated to return feelings just because I'm your boss." I stared at him, my mind reeling, my heart doing acrobatics in my chest. "And what if I told you that I've been feeling the same way since the day I got here? That every time you look at me, every time you touch me, even just in passing, it takes everything I have not to." I cut myself off, suddenly scared of revealing too much, of making this even more complicated. His eyes snapped open, fixing on me with an intensity that made my knees weak. "Don't say things like that." "Why not? It's true." I took a step closer, emboldened by his confession, by the knowledge that I wasn't alone in this. "You think I haven't noticed the way you watch me, the way you find excuses to work with me instead of the other hands, the way you—" "Evan," my name was a warning, almost a plea. "I'm an adult, Dalton, I know my own mind. And yeah, you're my boss, but that's not why I swallowed hard, forcing myself to say it. "That's not why I've fallen for you. It's because of who you are, the way you're patient with me when I screw up, the way you notice when I'm having a bad day and somehow always know exactly what to say, the way you look at the land like it's something precious worth protecting, the way you—" I didn't get to finish, because suddenly he was there, closing the distance between us in 2 long strides, his hands coming up to frame my face. For a heartbeat, we just stood there, frozen, his eyes searching mine like he was looking for permission or maybe the strength to pull away. Then, with a sound that was half groan, half surrender, he kissed me. The world tilted. His lips were firm and warm against mine, tasting of tea and rain and everything I'd been dreaming about for months. One of his hands slid into my hair while the other dropped to my waist, pulling me closer, and I made a sound I'd never heard myself make before, desperate and wanting and utterly lost. I grabbed onto his bare shoulders, needing something to anchor me, and felt the heat of his skin searing into my palms. The kiss deepened, grew more urgent, and I parted my lips for him, letting him in, drowning in the sensation of finally having what I'd wanted for so long. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. "We shouldn't be doing this," he whispered, but his hands tightened on me like he couldn't bear to let go. "Probably not," I agreed, just as quietly, "but I don't want to stop." He made that groaning sound again, part frustration, part desire. "Evan, I need you to be sure about this, because once we cross this line, there's no going back. Everything changes." I looked up at him, at this man who'd become so important to me in such a short time, and felt nothing but certainty. "I'm sure. I've never been more sure of anything." For a moment more he hesitated, clearly warring with himself. Then something in his expression shifted, resolved, like he'd finally made a decision he could live with. He kissed me again, slower this time but no less intense, and whispered against my lips, "Upstairs. Now." We barely made it to his bedroom. Fade to black, intimate moment, handled with discretion. I woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the warm weight of Dalton's arm across my waist. For a moment, I just lay there, my mind slowly putting together the pieces of the night before. And a smile spread across my face that I couldn't have suppressed if I tried. Everything ached in the best possible way, and when I shifted slightly, Dalton made a sleepy sound of protest, pulling me closer against his chest. "Don't even think about getting up yet," he mumbled into my hair, his voice rough with sleep. I turned in his arms to face him, taking in his sleep-mussed appearance, the pillow creases on his face, the stubble darkening his jaw, the soft vulnerability in his expression that I'd never seen before. "Morning," I said softly. His eyes opened, focusing on me, and something warm and tender passed through them. "Morning." He reached up, brushing a thumb across my cheekbone in a gesture so gentle it made my throat tight. "How you feeling?" "Good, really good." I hesitated, suddenly uncertain. "Are you? Do you regret it?" "No," the answer was immediate and firm, his arms tightening around me. "Not even a little bit, you." "Not at all." We lay there for a while longer, just holding each other, talking quietly about nothing in particular, learning what it felt like to be together like this, without all the walls and pretense between us. Eventually, reality intruded in the form of chores that needed doing and a ranch that wouldn't run itself. We got up, moving around each other in his bedroom with a new kind of intimacy, stealing kisses and touches whenever we passed. When I pulled on yesterday's clothes, now dry and somewhat presentable, he caught me by the waist and kissed me thoroughly enough to make my head spin. "We need to talk about this," he said when we finally broke apart, keeping his hands on my hips. "About what it means, how we handle it going forward." I nodded, understanding the weight of what he was saying. The ranch employed other people. We lived in a small, conservative community. And while I'd come to terms with who I was, Dalton had spent his entire life here, building a reputation and a business that could be affected by people's prejudices. "I know, we'll figure it out." Over the next few days, we did exactly that. We agreed to keep things quiet for now, not out of shame, but out of practicality. Dalton wanted time to figure out how to navigate this publicly without it affecting the ranch or the people who depended on it for their livelihood. In private, though, things between us blossomed in a way that left me constantly amazed. He was attentive and affectionate, stealing moments alone with me whenever possible, teaching me this whole new dimension of our relationship with the same patient care he'd shown me with everything else. We fell into a routine where I'd finish my work and then head to the main house, and we'd spend our evenings together, cooking dinner, talking about our days, slowly building something that felt real and lasting. But keeping secrets proved harder than either of us anticipated. About 2 weeks after that first night, one of the older ranch hands, a weathered cowboy named Jim who'd been working there for 15 years, cornered me in the barn. "Kid, I'm gonna say this once, and I'm saying it because I like you and I respect the hell out of Dalton," he started, his expression serious. "I don't know what's going on between you two, and I don't need to know the details, but whatever it is, be careful. Dalton's a good man, but he's also carrying a lot of weight. This ranch, his family's legacy, the respect of this community, it all matters to him. If things go sideways, it's not just you two who could get hurt." I felt my face flame, embarrassment and defensiveness warring in my chest. "I don't know what you're talking about." Jim gave me a look that said he knew better but wasn't going to push. "Like I said, don't need details, just be smart about it, both of you." The conversation left me unsettled, and when I mentioned it to Dalton that night, I could see the worry creep into his expression. "Jim's not wrong," he admitted quietly. "We have been getting a bit careless. People are going to notice if they haven't already." "So what do we do?" He pulled me into his arms, resting his chin on top of my head. "We be more careful, and we start thinking about the long term. Because Evan, I need you to know, this isn't just some fling for me. I'm in this. But I also need to figure out how to protect what we have while still maintaining what I've built here." "I understand." We tried to be more discreet after that, putting distance between us during work hours, being careful about who saw us together. But the constant hiding started to wear on both of us. I hated pretending during the day that Dalton was just my boss, nothing more, when at night I fell asleep in his arms. He grew quieter, more withdrawn, clearly struggling with the weight of trying to be true to himself while protecting everything he'd worked for. Things came to a head on a sweltering afternoon in mid-August. We were working in the lower pasture, just the two of us, checking on a section of fence that had been damaged by a fallen tree. The heat was oppressive, and I'd been getting increasingly frustrated with a stubborn fence post that refused to set properly. Dalton came over to help, and when his hand brushed mine on the post driver, I pulled away sharply, suddenly angry at all the pretending and hiding. "What's wrong?" he asked, his brow furrowing. "Nothing, I'm fine," but my voice was tight, and we both knew it was a lie. "Evan." I said, "I'm fine, Dalton. Can we just finish this and get back?" He was quiet for a moment, and I could feel his gaze on me. "You're not fine, talk to me." I threw down the post driver with more force than necessary, turning to face him. "What do you want me to say? That I hate this? That I'm tired of pretending you don't mean anything to me every time someone else is around? That I'm sick of feeling like we're doing something wrong when all we're doing is caring about each other?" His expression tightened. "You think this is easy for me? I think you're letting fear make your decisions, instead of trusting that the people who care about you will still respect you regardless of who you love. It's not that simple, and you know it." "Isn't it?" I could feel tears prickling at my eyes and hated myself for it, because from where I'm standing, it seems pretty simple. Either what we have is worth fighting for, or it's not. "Don't do that," he said, his voice low and rough. "Don't make this an ultimatum." I'm tired, Dalton, tired of hiding, tired of feeling like I'm something you're ashamed of." The hurt that flashed across his face was immediate and raw. "I am not ashamed of you. How could you even think that?" "Then prove it," the words burst out of me, fueled by weeks of pent-up frustration and fear. "Stop treating what we have like it's some dirty secret. Stop pulling away from me the second anyone else might see. Stop acting like being with me is something that has to be hidden in the dark." We stood there in the blazing heat, both breathing hard, the air between us crackling with tension and hurt and things we couldn't take back. Finally, Dalton spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need time to figure out how to do this right. Can you give me that?" I wanted to say yes, wanted to be understanding and patient and everything he needed. But the truth was, I was scared that time was just another word for never, that eventually he'd decide the risk wasn't worth it. How much time? "I don't know, but I'm asking you to trust me, trust that I'm trying." I looked at him, at this man I'd fallen so hard for, and felt something crack in my chest. "Okay," I said finally. "Okay." The next few weeks were tense. Dalton threw himself into work with an intensity that bordered on obsessive, taking on projects that could have waited and spending long hours away from the house. I tried to give him space while also maintaining my own work, but the distance between us felt like a living thing, growing wider every day. When we did spend time together, there was a carefulness to it, like we were both afraid of saying the wrong thing and shattering whatever fragile peace we'd managed to maintain. Then September rolled in, bringing with it the county fair, a massive event that the entire community looked forward to all year. The ranch always had a presence there, showing off some of our best livestock and competing in various contests. Dalton was busier than I'd ever seen him, coordinating with other ranchers, preparing animals for showing, and handling 1,000 logistical details. I helped where I could, but mostly I felt like I was watching him from a distance, seeing the walls he'd built back up between us and not knowing how to break through them. The night before the fair, he asked me to come with him to help transport some of the animals to the fairgrounds. It was just the two of us in his truck, driving through the darkness, and for a little while. It almost felt like the early days, comfortable, easy, right. We talked about small things, careful to avoid the elephant in the room, and I let myself relax into the familiar rumble of his voice and the warmth of his presence. At the fairgrounds, we ran into several people Dalton knew, other ranchers, community leaders, people who greeted him with hearty handshakes and friendly conversation. I hung back, helping unload animals and set up the stalls, painfully aware of my role as just another ranch hand. At one point, a woman approached, attractive, probably close to Dalton's age, with a confident smile and familiar manner. She hugged him like they were old friends, and I felt something ugly twist in my stomach as I watched them talk, heads bent close, her hand lingering on his arm. When Dalton finally came back over to where I was working, I didn't look up from the feed I was distributing. "Old friend?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Something like that, Sarah Henderson. We went to high school together." He paused, and I could feel him watching me. "Evan, look at me." I didn't want him to see the jealousy and insecurity I was feeling, but eventually I turned to face him. "What?" "There's nothing there, nothing but old memories and shared history." "I didn't say there was." "You didn't have to, I can see it on your face." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You're the one I want, the only one, you know that." I did know that on some level, but knowing it and feeling secure in it were two different things, especially when we were standing in public and he couldn't even touch me the way he would if she were a girlfriend instead of me being whatever I was to him in the eyes of the world. The fair itself was exhausting. We spent 2 full days there, long hours on our feet dealing with livestock and competitors, and the endless stream of people stopping by to look at the animals or ask questions about the ranch. Dalton was in his element, charming and professional, every inch the successful rancher carrying on his family's legacy. I watched people respect him, admire him, and felt the distance between us stretch even further. How could I ask him to risk losing all of this? How could I be selfish enough to want him to choose me over the life he'd built? On the second evening, after most of the crowds had thinned out, I was cleaning up our stall area when I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. 2 men were standing a few feet away, their backs to me, talking in the casual way people do when they don't think anyone's listening. "You see Dalton Pierce's new stable boy, kid's barely old enough to drink." "Yeah, I noticed him. Follows Dalton around like a lost puppy. Think there's something there." The other man laughed, but it wasn't a kind sound. "Nah, Dalton's straight-laced as they come, probably just feels sorry for the kid. You know how he is about taking in strays." Shame if there was something going on, though. His daddy would roll over in his grave. All that family history, all that respectability, destroyed because his son turned out to be. I didn't wait to hear the rest. I walked away quickly, my heart pounding, feeling sick to my stomach. This was what Dalton was afraid of. This casual cruelty, this easy dismissal of who he was, the threat to everything his family had built. How could I have been so naive, thinking love would be enough? That night back at the ranch, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying that conversation, kept imagining what would happen if Dalton and I were discovered. The whispers, the judgment, the potential impact on his business. Around midnight, I got up and went downstairs, intending to get some water, and found Dalton sitting in the dark kitchen, a glass of whiskey in his hand. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked quietly when he saw me. I sat down across from him, suddenly feeling like we were miles apart despite being at the same table. "I overheard some people talking at the fair, about you, about us." His hand tightened on the glass. "What did they say?" I told him, watching his expression grow tighter with every word. When I finished, he was silent for a long time, staring down at his whiskey like it held answers. "This is what I've been afraid of," he said finally. "This exact thing. I know. If people start talking, if it affects the ranch's reputation, it could damage business. Partnerships I've spent years building could dissolve. And it's not just about money or pride. There are 5 families that depend on this place for their livelihood. I can't be responsible for taking that away from them because I couldn't keep my personal life private." Every word felt like a knife, but I understood. God help me, I understood completely. "So what are you saying?" He finally looked up, meeting my eyes, and the pain in his expression was unmistakable. "I'm saying maybe we need to step back, put some distance between us until I figure out a way to handle this that doesn't risk everything." "Distance," the word tasted bitter. "You mean end it?" "No, I don't know what I mean. I just know that I can't keep asking you to hide, and I can't risk losing this ranch and everything it represents. There has to be a middle ground somewhere. I just haven't found it yet." I stood up, suddenly unable to sit still, unable to keep looking at him without breaking down. "You want to know what I think? I think you're so scared of losing what you have that you're not even giving us a real chance. I think you're letting other people's potential opinions dictate your entire life, and that's no way to live." "That's easy for you to say. You don't have generations of history weighing on you." "You're right, I don't. All I have is me, and apparently that's not enough." "Evan, that's not what I—" "Isn't it?" I was shaking now, adrenaline and heartbreak coursing through me, because from where I'm standing, it seems pretty clear. The ranch, your reputation, your family's legacy, they all matter more than us. And you know what? Maybe they should. Maybe I was stupid for thinking we could make this work. I turned and walked away before he could respond, before I could say something I'd regret even more. I heard him call my name, heard the scrape of his chair as he started to follow, but I didn't stop. I went straight to my room in the bunkhouse, locked the door, and finally let myself fall apart. The next morning, I packed my things. It didn't take long. I'd arrived with almost nothing, and I was leaving with only slightly more. Dalton found me as I was loading my duffel into the old truck I'd managed to buy with my saved wages, his expression haggard like he hadn't slept at all. "What are you doing?" he asked, though it was obvious. "Leaving, making this easier for both of us." "Evan, don't do this, don't run." I turned to face him, and I could see the exact moment he registered how final this was, how completely I'd shut down. "I'm not running. I'm choosing self-respect over constantly wondering if I'm good enough for you to take a risk on. You need time and space to figure out your priorities. Well, now you have all the time and space you need. You are my priority, you and the ranch. You're both important to me." "That's the problem, Dalton. I can't compete with a legacy. I can't compete with generations of expectations and fear and the weight of other people's judgments. And I shouldn't have to." He stepped closer, desperation creeping into his voice. "What if I told you I'll tell them? Today, I'll tell Jim and everyone else exactly what you are to me. And tomorrow, when you see the looks they give you, when you hear the whispers, when business starts to suffer, how long before you resent me for it?" I shook my head, feeling tears sting my eyes, but refusing to let them fall. "I love you, Dalton. I love you enough to know that forcing you to choose isn't fair to either of us. So you're making the choice for me." "I'm making it for both of us. Maybe someday you'll figure out how to balance everything. Maybe you'll find someone who doesn't come with all the complications I bring. But right now, I need to go before this destroys us both completely. I climbed into the truck before I could change my mind, before the look of devastation on his face could break my resolve. As I drove away, I watched him in the rearview mirror, standing in the middle of the drive, growing smaller and smaller until he disappeared entirely. The next month was the hardest of my life. I found a job at a ranch 3 counties over, smaller and less prestigious than Dalton's, but honest work with decent people. I threw myself into it the way he'd taught me, using physical exhaustion to numb the constant ache in my chest. At night, I'd lie in my rented room above a feed store and wonder what he was doing, whether he was thinking about me. Whether leaving had been the right choice or the biggest mistake of my life. I heard through the ranching grapevine that the Double D was doing well, that Dalton had taken on some new contracts and was expanding his operation. Every piece of news felt like confirmation that he was better off without me, that my presence in his life had only ever been a complication he was better without. Then 6 weeks after I left, my phone rang at 2 in the morning. The number was one I'd memorized but deleted from my contacts, trying to make a clean break. I stared at it for 3 rings, my heart pounding, before I finally answered. Evan, just my name, spoken in that rough voice I'd heard in my dreams every night since leaving, and I felt myself crack wide open. Dalton, what's wrong? Is everything okay? No, nothing's okay. I can't sleep, can't focus, can barely function because all I can think about is you, about how I let you leave, about how much of a coward I was. He paused and I could hear him take a shaky breath. I told them, everyone, Jim, the other ranch hands, some of the business associates I work with regularly. I told them I'm gay and that I let the best thing that ever happened to me walk away because I was too scared to fight for it. My hand was shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone. You didn't have to do that. Yeah, I did, because you were right about everything. I was letting fear run my life, letting the possibility of judgment matter more than the reality of loving you. And I'm done with that. I'm done pretending that this legacy means anything if I can't live authentically while carrying it. What did they say? Jim said he'd known for weeks and was wondering when I'd get my head out of my ass. The others, it was mixed. A couple guys were uncomfortable, but they're professional enough to work through it. Lost 1 business contract, gained 2 new ones from people who appreciated my honesty. Turns out the world didn't end just because I finally told the truth. I was crying now, tears streaming down my face, my chest tight with hope and fear and overwhelming love. Why are you telling me this now? Because I need you to know that I chose you, that I'm choosing you, and I know I hurt you, and I know I don't deserve another chance, but if there's any part of you that still wants this, still wants us, I'm all in. No more hiding, no more halfway, just you and me building something real. Dalton! You don't have to answer now. I know I'm asking a lot, expecting you to trust me after I already let you down once. But Evan, I love you. I'm in love with you. Have been since probably that first week when you refused to give up on that stubborn fence post, even though you were clearly exhausted. And I will spend however long it takes proving to you that you can count on me, that I won't let fear drive us apart again. I was full on sobbing now, curled up on my bed, clutching the phone like a lifeline. I love you too. God, Dalton, I never stopped. Then come home. His voice broke on the last word. Please, come home to me. I gave my notice the next day and spent a torturous 2 weeks finishing out my obligations to the ranch that had taken me in. The owner, a kind older woman named Margaret who'd asked exactly 0 questions about why I'd shown up looking devastated, gave me a knowing smile when I told her I was leaving. Someone finally came to their senses, she asked. Something like that. About time, you've been mopping around here like a ghost. Go get your man. The drive back to the Double D took 3 hours, and every minute felt like an eternity. I went over everything Dalton had said, everything I wanted to say, trying to prepare myself for whatever came next. When I finally turned onto that familiar dirt road, my hands were shaking on the wheel. Dalton was waiting on the porch of the main house like he'd been standing there for 2 weeks straight. The moment he saw my truck, he was moving, taking the porch steps 2 at a time, crossing the yard at a run. I barely had time to put the truck in park and open the door before he was there, pulling me into his arms, holding me so tight I could barely breathe. "You came back," he said into my hair, his voice rough with emotion. "You actually came back. You asked me to." I pulled back just enough to see his face, to read the truth in his eyes. "And you promised things would be different." "They will be, they are." He cupped my face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears I didn't realize were falling. "I meant everything I said. No more hiding. You're not my secret, Evan. You're my partner, and anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me." He kissed me then, right there in the yard where anyone could see, and it felt like coming home in every sense of the word. When we finally broke apart, I noticed Jim standing on the porch, a slight smile on his weathered face. He raised his coffee mug in a salute, then discreetly went back inside, giving us privacy. Over the next few days, I moved back into my old room in the bunkhouse, at least officially, though I spent most nights in Dalton's bed. He introduced me to people not as his stable hand, but as his boyfriend, the word sounding both foreign and wonderful in his drawl. Some people reacted with surprise, others with acceptance, and yes, a few with thinly veiled disapproval. But Dalton handled each interaction with quiet dignity, making it clear that this was non-negotiable, that I was non-negotiable. The ranch hands adapted quickly. Jim pulled me aside one afternoon and said, "Glad you're back, kid. Place wasn't the same without you," and Dalton was absolutely miserable, couldn't make a decision to save his life. The others fell in line, and soon it felt almost normal, this new version of our life where we didn't have to hide. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were challenges, dealing with older clients who stopped doing business with us, navigating social situations in town where we sometimes felt people's stares, learning how to be a couple in public after so long being forced into secrecy. Dalton struggled with some of it, I could tell, not because he regretted his choice, but because unlearning a lifetime of hiding wasn't easy. Sometimes I'd catch him starting to pull away in public before remembering he didn't have to anymore, or see the tension in his shoulders when we walked into a room together. One evening, about a month after I'd returned, we were having dinner in town at a small restaurant when an older man approached our table. I recognized him from the fair, one of the prominent ranchers in the county, someone whose opinion carried weight. My stomach clenched as he stopped beside our table, his expression unreadable. "Dalton," he said, nodding, "heard some talk about you and your situation." Dalton's hand found mine under the table, squeezing gently. "If you mean my relationship with Evan, then yes. What about it, Frank?" Frank looked between us, and I braced myself for judgment, for another lost business connection, for the kind of casual cruelty I'd overheard at the fair. Instead, the man's stern expression softened slightly. "Wanted to say I admire your honesty. Takes guts to be open about things, especially in this community. Your daddy would have had some adjusting to do, probably, but I think he'd be proud of the man you've become. The ranch is thriving, you treat your people well, and you're living your truth. That's more than most can say." He extended his hand to Dalton, who shook it, looking slightly stunned. Then Frank turned to me and did the same. "You take care of him, son. Good men are hard to find." "Yes, sir, I intend to." After he walked away, Dalton and I sat in silence for a moment, both processing what had just happened. Then he turned to me, his eyes bright with something that looked like wonder. "Did that really just happen?" "I think so. I'm not entirely sure I didn't hallucinate it." He laughed, the sound free and genuine in a way I'd rarely heard, and raised his water glass. "To surprising allies and new beginnings." I clinked my glass against his, feeling lighter than I had in months. "To us." Fall turned to winter, and we settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable and right. Dalton officially moved me into the main house, converting one of the spare rooms into an office space for me. He'd learned about my interest in writing and encouraged me to pursue it in my free time. We worked the ranch together during the day, building an even stronger partnership now that we weren't constantly fighting against our feelings. In the evenings, we'd have dinner together, talk about our plans for the ranch, or simply exist in comfortable silence. The ranch continued to thrive. Yes, we'd lost some business from more conservative clients, but we'd gained new contracts with people who appreciated Dalton's integrity. The quality of our work spoke for itself, and slowly but surely, people in the community began to accept us, or at least tolerate us. There were still difficult moments. Anonymous, nasty letters occasionally appeared in the mailbox, and we got our share of cold shoulders in town, but they became easier to weather together. One cold December evening, we were sitting on the porch despite the chill, wrapped in blankets and watching the sun set over the mountains. Dalton had been quieter than usual all day, and I'd learned to recognize when he was working through something in his head. "What are you thinking about?" I asked finally, snuggling closer to his warmth. He was silent for a moment, his arm tightening around my shoulders. About how different everything is from a year ago, about how close I came to losing this because I was too afraid to reach for it. "But you didn't lose it. We are here." "We are," he turned to look at me, his expression serious. "Evan, I need you to know something. When I told you I was all in, I meant it. This isn't temporary for me. You're not a phase or an experiment or something I'm trying on to see if it fits. You're it for me. You're the person I want to build a life with." My heart was suddenly racing. "Dalton." "I'm not asking you to make any decisions tonight," he continued, speaking faster like he needed to get it all out. "I know you're young, and you might want to explore the world, find out what else is out there before settling down. And if that's what you need, I'll support it, even if it kills me. But I want you to know that when you're ready, whether that's next year or 5 years from now, I'll be here, waiting, hoping you'll choose to stay." I sat up, turning to face him fully, needing him to see the truth in my eyes. "I don't need to explore the world to know what I want. I found it the day I walked onto this ranch looking for a job and found a home instead. Found you. I'm not going anywhere, Dalton, not unless you're coming with me." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of promise. He kissed me, slow and thorough, pouring everything he felt into it. When we finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine, his voice rough with emotion. "I love you, more than I thought I was capable of loving anyone." "I love you too, so much it scares me sometimes." "Good scared or bad scared?" "Good scared, the kind that means it matters, that you matter." We sat there until the stars came out, talking about our dreams for the future, ways to expand the ranch, trips we wanted to take, the life we were building together one day at a time. It wasn't always easy. We still had disagreements, still struggled sometimes with the baggage we'd each brought into the relationship, still faced judgment from people who couldn't understand or accept what we had. But we faced it together, and that made all the difference. Spring came again, bringing with it new calves and longer days, and the annual rush of getting everything ready for another season. I'd been at the ranch for just over a year now, and it felt like a lifetime and no time at all. So much had changed, yet the fundamentals remained: the land, the work, the quiet satisfaction of building something with your own hands. One morning in early April, almost exactly a year from the day I'd first arrived, Dalton woke me before dawn with a request to come with him on a ride. We saddled up 2 horses and rode out to the upper pasture, the same place where we'd worked that day I'd caught him staring at me, the day I'd first realized there might be something between us. We dismounted near a section of fence that overlooked the entire valley, the ranch spread out below us in the pre-dawn gray. Dalton stood behind me, his arms wrapped around my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder. "You see all that?" he asked quietly. "Yeah." "That's ours, not just mine anymore, ours. Everything we've built, everything we're going to build. I want you to be my partner in all of it, not just the work, but the ownership, the decisions, the whole damn thing." I turned in his arms to look at him, my breath catching at the vulnerability in his expression. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to make you a co-owner of the ranch, legal partner in the business." And he paused, seeming to gather courage, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple silver band. "And I'm saying I want to marry you, if you'll have me." Time seemed to stop. The sunrise painted the sky behind him in shades of gold and pink, and in that moment, everything, all the pain and fear and struggle to get here, felt worth it. "Yes," I said, my voice breaking. "Yes to all of it." He slipped the ring onto my finger, his hands shaking slightly, and kissed me with a tenderness that made my eyes sting with happy tears. When we finally broke apart, the sun was fully up, bathing everything in warm light, and I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. "Thank you," Dalton said softly. "For what?" "For being brave enough to walk away when I wasn't being the man you deserved. For being forgiving enough to come back when I finally got my head out of my ass. For choosing this life, this ranch, me, even when it wasn't easy." I cupped his face in my hands, looking into those amber eyes that had captivated me from the start. "Thank you for being worth waiting for fighting for us when it mattered most, for showing me what it means to build a real home." We rode back to the ranch hand in hand, ready to start our day, ready to face whatever challenges came our way. Because we weren't just surviving anymore, we were thriving, building something real and lasting together. And it was more than I'd ever dreamed possible. Epilogue: 1 year later. The wedding was small and perfect, held right there on the ranch with the mountains as our backdrop and the people who'd come to accept us bearing witness. Jim stood up as Dalton's best man, tears streaming unashamedly down his weathered face. Margaret drove in from 3 counties over to stand with me. We said our vows at sunset, promising to love and support each other through whatever came, and sealed it with a kiss that had everyone cheering. Running the ranch together proved to be the best decision either of us had ever made. My fresh perspective, combined with Dalton's experience, led to innovations that increased our profitability while maintaining the land's sustainability. We hired more diverse staff, creating an environment where people felt safe being themselves. Word spread, and we became known not just for quality livestock and good business practices, but for being a place where everyone was welcome. The community continued to evolve around us. More young people started coming back to town, bringing new energy and perspectives. The local Pride Parade we helped organize in our 2nd year together drew surprising support. Change was slow, but it was happening, and we were proud to be part of it. 2 years after our wedding, we stood in that same upper pasture, watching the sun rise over land that had been in Dalton's family for generations and would hopefully continue for generations more. I had my laptop with me. My first novel was nearly finished, a story about finding home in unexpected places, and several publishers had expressed interest. Dalton had his arms around me, and I leaned back against his chest, marveling at how much could change in just a few short years. "Any regrets?" I asked, as I sometimes still did, needing the reassurance. "Not a single one." His answer was immediate and certain, as it always was. "You." Only that I didn't have the courage to say something sooner. He turned me in his arms, his expression tender. "We found our way here eventually, that's what matters." And he was right. The path hadn't been straight or easy, but it had led us exactly where we needed to be, together, building a life we could both be proud of, on land that had seen so much history and would hopefully see so much more. As the sun fully rose, painting everything in gold, I silently thanked my younger self for being brave enough to answer that ad, to take a chance on a new life. Thank you for walking onto this ranch with nothing but hope and determination. Thank you for falling in love with a man who was worth the fight. And thank you for having the strength to walk away when it mattered, because that's what finally gave him the courage to become the man he needed to be. This is our home, our legacy, our future. And I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. The end. Did this story touch your heart? If you want to see what happens next in Evan and Dalton's journey, their adventures expanding the ranch, navigating married life, and becoming pillars of their community, subscribe, hit that like button, and drop a comment below telling me what you loved most about their story. Remember, love is always worth fighting for. Never let fear stop you from reaching for your happiness. 2 hearts.